Judge Tasha Johnson had always prided herself on her career. As a respected African-American judge, she had climbed her way up through the legal system, fighting against the odds every step of the way. Her courtroom was a place of respect and authority, where she upheld justice for all. Yet, outside those walls, life often threw her challenges that no amount of education or prestige could protect her from. It was a long day at the courthouse, but Tasha remained composed as she drove home. The streets were quiet, the kind of calm that came after a busy day. She'd spent hours in court, deliberating complex cases, and now she just wanted to grab a cup of coffee before heading home. Her car hummed along the familiar streets as the city lights flickered in the distance. She pulled into a local convenience store parking lot, her mind already on the warmth of the coffee she craved. But as she stepped out of the car, she noticed a few police officers gathered near a vehicle. At first, she thought nothing of it, but something about their presence made her uneasy. Little did she know, this moment so seemingly ordinary would soon escalate into something she never could have imagined. Tasha stepped out of her car, stretching her legs after the long drive. The cool evening air felt like a relief, but as she walked toward the store, an officer approached her. His hand rested on the holster of his gun, a gesture that immediately put her on edge. "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer said, his voice firm but not unfriendly. "I need to ask you a few questions about the vehicle you're driving." Tasha paused, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's this about?" she asked, glancing at the car she had just parked. It was her car, an older model, but well-maintained. "The car you're driving matches the description of a stolen vehicle," the officer continued, his eyes scanning her face. "We've been notified to stop anyone driving a car like this. We need you to come with us." Her stomach twisted. "This is my car," Tasha explained, holding up her keys for him to see. "I've had it for years. There's been a mistake." The officer didn't seem to hear her. Instead, he stepped closer, his expression hardening. "We'll need to verify that, ma'am. Please stay where you are." Tasha's frustration grew. "I'm telling you, this is my car. I've had the registration for it in my name." Before she could say more, another officer, who had been watching from the side, moved in, his arms crossed over his chest. "Ma'am, we've had enough of this. You're under suspicion of car theft. Step away from the vehicle." Tasha's chest tightened with disbelief. She remained calm, trying to reason with them, but the officers were growing more aggressive. She could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing down on her. "This isn't right," she whispered, but no one was listening. Within moments the officers were surrounding her. One of them grabbed her arm roughly, yanking it behind her back. "Hey," she protested, trying to pull away, but they had already put the cuffs on her. The cold metal felt like a slap in the face. Her heart raced as she was shoved toward the police car. The humiliation burned in her chest, and her frustration deepened. "You don't have any right to do this," she said, her voice shaking with anger, but the officers remained silent, their hands cold as they pushed her into the back of the squad car. Tasha knew she had done nothing wrong, but now, sitting in the back of that car, she realized that for reasons beyond her control, she was about to be dragged into something much larger than a simple misunderstanding. Tasha sat in the small, uncomfortable chair in the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap. She couldn't help but feel out of place. The sterile, cold atmosphere of the courtroom seemed to mock her as the proceedings went on. She had been charged with car theft, a crime she had never committed. The weight of the false accusation pressed down on her chest, but she tried to remain composed, her mind racing as the trial began. The courtroom was full of people, lawyers, spectators, and the familiar hum of whispers filling the air. It was just another ordinary day in court, or so it seemed. Tasha had always been the one presiding over cases like this, but today she was the one being judged. The prosecutor, a young and eager man, rose to present the case. He spoke with confidence, his words flowing easily as he painted a picture of Tasha as a criminal. He outlined the details of the arrest, focusing on the claim that her car matched the description of a stolen vehicle. His tone was accusatory, and as he spoke, Tasha felt the sharp sting of each word. The officers who had arrested her were called to testify. They spoke with conviction, recalling the moment they had pulled Tasha over and accused her of stealing the car. Tasha tried to maintain her composure, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. It was clear they were presenting a version of events that painted her as guilty, ignoring the fact that they had never verified her story or even considered the possibility of a mistake. Tasha's stomach twisted as the prosecutor continued, pushing forward with the case against her. He seemed determined to convict her, leaning heavily on the circumstantial evidence and the officer's testimony. She could see the judge's face, unreadable, as he listened intently, his gavel poised to strike. The tension in the air was suffocating. And then, just as Tasha thought she couldn't take any more of the injustice, the defense attorney stood up. There was a flicker of hope in Tasha's chest. Maybe this would be her chance to explain herself, to have someone stand up for her. "Your Honor," the defense attorney began, his voice calm and measured, "I would like to call a witness to the stand." The courtroom fell silent. Everyone turned their attention to the defense table as the attorney motioned toward Tasha. "I call Judge Tasha Johnson." The words hung in the air like a heavy silence. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room turn to her, some with confusion, others with suspicion. She stood slowly, her knees suddenly weak, but she refused to let the fear show. The weight of the moment hit her all at once. She wasn't just the defendant, she was the judge in this very courtroom. As she stepped forward, a hushed murmur rippled through the room. She approached the witness stand, her hands steady, despite the growing tension. The prosecutor's face turned pale as the realization hit him. The officers who had testified, their faces full of confidence just moments before, now seemed unnerved. Tasha took her place in the witness box, her voice strong and clear. "I am Judge Tasha Johnson," she began, looking out at the courtroom full of stunned faces, "and I am here to explain that the car you believe I stole is mine. I am not a criminal. I am a judge and I expect justice to be served here today." The room fell into complete silence, the weight of her revelation settling over everyone. No one had expected this twist. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and Tasha knew that things were about to change. The courtroom erupted into stunned silence as Tasha's words sank in. Gasps filled the room as everyone, judges, attorneys, spectators, stared at her in disbelief. The prosecutor, who had been so confident moments ago, now stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The officers who had arrested her were equally stunned, their faces draining of color as they began to realize the gravity of their mistake. Tasha maintained her calm, her demeanor composed and dignified. She knew she had to remain in control, despite the whirlwind of emotions threatening to overtake her. Slowly she looked at the judge, the man who had been presiding over her case, now caught in the midst of an absurd situation. "I am Judge Tasha Johnson," she repeated, her voice steady, "and I have been wrongfully arrested for a crime I did not commit." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. The courtroom was still, the tension palpable. Every eye was on her, and for the first time, she felt an overwhelming sense of power. But it was not the kind of power she had ever hoped to wield. This was the kind of power born of a deep injustice, a mistake made not only by the officers, but by the very system that was supposed to protect her. Tasha continued, her eyes now moving from the prosecutor to the officers who had been so quick to accuse her. "I've worked my entire career to uphold the law, to protect the innocent, and yet here I stand, falsely accused, humiliated, and treated as a criminal, all because of an assumption based on my race and my appearance." The officers, once so sure of themselves, were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their faces had turned a sickly shade of pale, their earlier bravado evaporating. One officer began to speak but faltered, his voice cracking as he stammered, "We fought." Tasha cut him off with a sharp look. "You fought. You didn't think. You acted without reason, without any proof, and now you stand here with no defense for your actions." The officer's mouth opened and closed, unable to form a coherent response. The prosecutor tried to speak up, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your Honor, we were only following protocol." "Protocol?" Tasha's voice rose, no longer calm, but controlled by a quiet fury. "Protocol does not justify discrimination. Protocol does not excuse racial profiling. You saw a black woman in a car, and assumed the worst." Her words hung in the air, and the officers squirmed in their seats, realizing that they could no longer deny the truth. There was no defense for their actions, no excuse that could make up for the humiliation they had inflicted on her. For a moment Tasha felt a surge of relief. The truth was finally out. The courtroom was forced to see her as more than just a defendant. But the relief was fleeting, replaced by a deep, bitter anger. She had spent her life fighting for justice, for equality, and now here she was, on the receiving end of the very system she had worked to improve. Her disappointment ran deep. Tasha thought of all the people who had come to her courtroom seeking justice, only to have their cases mishandled or overlooked because of biases that ran deep in the system. She had always been the one to deliver justice, but now, for the first time, she was the one who needed it. The realization stung more than any insult or offense, and yet, even in this moment of pain, she knew she had to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged in the same way. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the judge quickly took control of the situation. Tasha sat still, her posture dignified but her heart pounding as the gavel struck, signaling her immediate release from the charges. There was no need for further deliberation. Her identity had cleared the confusion. The officers, once so confident in their false accusations, were now being called out for their actions. The room filled with hushed whispers as the truth slowly sank in. The judge addressed the court with authority, announcing that the officers involved would be suspended pending an internal investigation into their conduct. The shock was palpable. It was rare to see such swift action against law enforcement, but Tasha's presence in the courtroom had made it undeniable. The system had failed her, and now it would have to answer for that failure. As the case came to a close, the defense attorney approached Tasha. "Your Honor," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity, "I owe you an apology. No one should have been put in this position." Tasha nodded, though the apology felt empty. It wasn't just about this case, it was about the countless others who didn't have the platform to expose such wrongs. "I appreciate your words," she said quietly, "but we need to do more than apologize. We need change." The attorney nodded, but Tasha could see the disappointment in his eyes. He knew it was a hollow gesture, a mere formality in the face of the deeper systemic problems they all had a hand in. When Tasha was given the chance to speak, she stood tall, her voice strong but full of emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," she began, "today, I stand before you not just as a defendant, but as someone who has spent her entire life working to ensure that justice prevails for everyone." She paused, her chest tightening as she thought back to the long hours she had spent studying law, the obstacles she had overcome to get where she was. "I've fought for fairness, for equality, for truth, but today I was reduced to a criminal, not because of anything I had done, but because of who I am." Her voice trembled with emotion as she continued, "I was accused of a crime because of the color of my skin. This isn't just about me, it's about every person of color who has been unfairly treated, falsely accused, and denied their rights simply because of their race. The justice system isn't perfect, it's flawed, and it's biased." Tasha took a deep breath, looking around the courtroom at the people who had witnessed her humiliation. "I've spent my life in this courtroom, fighting for justice, but today, I was the one who needed it. This is not an isolated incident, it's happening every day, in every corner of this country. We cannot continue to ignore it." The words echoed through the room, and for the first time that day, Tasha felt a sense of purpose. Her statement wasn't just for herself, it was for all those who had been wronged before her, and would continue to be wronged if nothing changed. In the days that followed, the public response was overwhelming. News outlets picked up the story, and the conversation around racial profiling and police conduct sparked a national discussion. The officers faced disciplinary action, and an internal review of police practices began. But it wasn't just a victory for Tasha, it was a victory for every person who had been marginalized, ignored, or oppressed. Though Tasha's reputation was intact, the battle wasn't over. The injustice she had faced had opened a wider conversation, one that would hopefully lead to change. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope that her fight for justice would make a real difference, not just in her courtroom, but in the world. As Tasha drove home that evening, the streets seemed quieter than usual, the world around her unchanged, but in her heart, everything had shifted. She reflected on the surreal experience, the sudden arrest, the courtroom revelation, the overwhelming injustice, and how, in the end, the truth had triumphed. Despite everything, she had been vindicated. She could still feel the echo of her words in the courtroom, the powerful reminder that justice, though often delayed, would always find a way to restore balance. But as she drove, Tasha couldn't shake the realization that her experience was just one of many. She thought of all the people who didn't have the platform or the power to expose the system's flaws. people of color who were still unfairly judged, falsely accused, and denied their basic rights. The fight for justice, she knew, was far from over. Yet, despite the weight of the world's injustices, there was a glimmer of hope in Tasha's heart. The moment she had stood up for herself in that courtroom had been a reminder of something powerful, that standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you, is a step toward change. She wasn't just a judge, she was a voice for those who couldn't speak, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt unjust. As the headlights from passing cars blurred past her, Tasha made a promise to herself. She would continue to fight for justice, not just for her, but for every person who deserved fairness and equality. Her story, she hoped, would inspire others to rise up, to speak out, and to never stop fighting for a better world. The road would be difficult, but it was one worth traveling. As we wrap up this powerful story of Judge Tasha Johnson, we're reminded of the strength and courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even in the face of injustice. Tasha's journey didn't end with her vindication, it sparked a much-needed conversation about racial profiling and the flaws within our justice system. Her story is a reminder that no matter the challenges, justice can and will find its way, as long as we continue to fight for what is fair. We hope this story inspired you to reflect on the importance of equality, integrity, and the need to stand up for those who might not have a voice. The road to justice isn't always easy, but it's one we must walk together. If you found this story moving, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and resilience. And remember, every small action counts when it comes to making a difference. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us all, no matter how difficult the road may be, we must always stand for what's right.